Huh, the world ended. Yeah, I guess it did, didn't it? Yeah, so we blew it up. Damn us all to hell. Sure. But you know what? For one brief moment there, we made incredible profits for our shareholders.
Hey, I know you. You're that jaywalking punk anarchist.
Hello, this is the Radical Reviewer taking a look at A Short History of Progress by Ronald Wright, Carroll and Graph Publishers, 2004. This text is all about the wonders of progress. No, wait, it's actually about how societies collapse, with a primary focus on this concept called a progress trap. A progress trap is an advancement, a progress with short term gains, but unforeseen long term consequences. A new super efficient way to catch fish? Oops, now the lake doesn't have fish in it anymore. A new way to build a bunch of wood houses on the hill? Oops, now with no tree roots maintaining the structural integrity of the hill, we have landslides destroying those homes. A new get rich quick scheme, a big short, rug pull, pump and dump thing that everyone is using to make a great return on their investment?
And it's gone.
What's all gone?
The money in your account, it didn't do too well, it's gone.
I think you get the idea. So let's learn about how societies collapse, let's learn about this concept of a progress trap, and jump into the text in depth, starting with Chapter 1, Gaugin's Question. Okay, so who is this Gaugin, and what is his question?
What is your favorite color? Blue. Right, off you go.
No, wait, that wasn't Gaugin. Gaugin was a late Victorian-era French painter who traveled the world searching for raw, pure humanity and doing a bunch of opium and fun stuff like that. One of the paintings he created was a giant Garden of Eden-looking piece titled French Words, and More French Words I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce, which translates into Where do we come from, what are we, and where are we going? Wait a minute, that's 3 questions. Oh, but wait, this is just Wright's roundabout, catchy setup for getting us to think about that last question, where are we going? Using a ship as a metaphor, Wright states, our civilization, which subsumes most of its predecessors, is a great ship steaming at speed into the future. By understanding her design, her safety record, and the abilities of her crew, we can, I think, plot a wise course between the Narrows and bergs looming ahead. And I believe we must do this without delay, because there are too many shipwrecks behind us. The world has grown too small to forgive us any big mistakes. Alright, so this Wright guy is some kind of Luddite primitivist, right? Who wants to go back to some imagined paradise of noble savages, reject technology, or return to monkey? Well, no. Wright is not arguing that progress is bad, but rather that we need to be careful, that progress can have unforeseen consequences. That if we want the ship that is our current society to, well, continue to be seaworthy, and if we look at the shipwrecks of the past, we will find that it's not progress which was the problem, but rather not adapting to our progress as needed and instead falling for the consequences of these progress traps.
Ugh, hunting mammoths is very strenuous. It takes all freaking day. Sometimes members of our tribe are killed in the process. What a hassle. Hey, I have an idea. The mammoths often blindly stampede away from us when they sense danger. What if there was a way to get them to all stampede into some kind of trap? Oh, that's a great idea. Maybe we could run them into, like, a fire or a wall of sharpened sticks or something. I know. Let's just run them off a cliff.
Moments later.
Wow, look at all these mammoth burgers we made. I'm stuffed. I couldn't eat another bite. What is a burger? Don't worry about that. I'm just saying, we totally have a new way of hunting now, which is so much more efficient. It's awesome.
Sometime later.
I haven't seen a dang mammoth herd in months. What the heck happened? If only we had established some kind of Bureau of Fish and Wildlife or an Endangered Species Act. Ugh, now he tells me.
And then they all starved to death and civilization never existed ever again. Well, okay, it didn't happen like that. Maybe it could have, but we luckily progressed beyond that point. But I guess that's kind of Wright's concern. Not just that we extinctified the mammoths, which is a real word. I'm smart and read a lot of books, but also don't look that up. Not that we progressed beyond that progress trap, but that each subsequent progress trap gets exponentially bigger. Wright's worry is that these progress traps are having greater impacts as our level of progress accelerates over time. As Wright states, from the first chipped stone to the first smelted iron took nearly 3 million years. From the first iron to the hydrogen bomb took only 3,000. The argument, of course, being that chipped stone weapons did some damage, iron weapons slightly more, but the hydrogen bomb did vastly more damage. Basically, making mammoths extinct was a bummer, but it was a bummer that only affected those living off of mammoths. Whereas these days, advances in technology, progress quickly impacts everyone on Earth. Thousands of years ago, the invention of writing only impacted those who had gained literacy, but the invention of the smartphone had a huge impact on everyone on Earth, basically, in kind of not as long of a time. If you compare what I'm saying, uh, I'm acting like this poor explanation followed by trailing off is just off the cuff and totally organic, but you and I both know that I'm reading this off a script, so who am I fooling? Anyways, okay, so we have this idea of progress traps and this idea that progress exponentially accelerates over time. We're now ready to begin the journey on this short history of progress by taking it back to where it all started with mammoths. Well, actually, it's a bit darker than that. Wright starts us off with the battle between the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnons. Wright states, for about 10 millennia, from 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, the late Neanderthals and the early Cro-Magnons probably did throw rocks at each other, not to mention dousing campfires, stealing game, and perhaps seizing women and children. But at some point, the Cro-Magnons put a piece of straw in their mouths and a hand on their six-shooter as a tumbleweed blew by, and they said, "This planet ain't big enough for the two of us." Or as Wright puts it, if Neanderthals were in fact a variant or race of modern man, then we must admit to ourselves that their death may have been the first genocide, or worse, not the first, merely the first of which evidence survives. Yay, progress. Chapter 2, The Great Experiment. Continuing from the extinction of the Neanderthal, Wright looks at the spread of humanity over the entire planet, this great experiment. He states, by 15,000 years ago at the very least, long before the ice withdraws, humankind is established on every continent except Antarctica. Like the worldwide expansion of Europe, this prehistoric wave of discovery and migration had profound ecological consequences. Soon after man shows up in new lands, the big game starts to go missing. Mammoths and woolly rhinos retreat north, then vanish from Europe and Asia. A giant wombat, other marsupials, and a tortoise as big as a Volkswagen disappear from Australia. Camels, mammoth, giant bison, giant sloth, and the horse die out across the Americas. A bad smell of extinction follows Homo sapiens around the world.
Hello, book reading dog and book reading dog audience. I've been asked to come and talk a little bit about the end of the Pleistocene and what killed off all of the Ice Age megafauna. Now, one of the things that people tend to do, and it's the way that our brains tend to like to process information, is to put a singular cause to every single action or every single event. Really, most of the time, especially with big events, there are multiple causes that are going on simultaneously that all make things catastrophic happen. Usually major catastrophes don't happen because of one thing, but because of multiple things happening at the same time. In regards to what happened to the Pleistocene or Ice Age megafauna, there are two main culprits. One, development of human hunting and introduction of humans into new ecosystems, and two, climate change. Now, for a long time, I know when I was taught as a child, we used to think that it was just the straight up humans moved into an area, they developed sophisticated hunting techniques to kill all of these megafauna, we wiped out all of these animals, they disappeared. It is true to a very large extent. We did spread out from the African continent, and every new ecosystem we found ourselves in, we basically ended up destroying a lot of the larger, more meatier species because we learned how to hunt them for food and hides and such. One of the reasons why African megafauna still exist, your elephants, your hippos and such, is because they evolved alongside us, so they knew how to handle humans, or at least Stone Age humans. But other animals in different ecosystems did not have such preparation, and so as we learned new techniques for killing them, they were not wise to our ways, and many of them went extinct before they could adapt. But they probably would have been able to adapt, or at least survive in some form, if it wasn't for the fact that other things were also changing. The Pleistocene Age ended with a period of snap-deep cold that also caused a lot of disruption to the ecosystems of the world. But as that period started to end, and as the Earth started to warm up and glaciers started to retreat, a lot of animals that had evolved to grow in very dry, cold climates all of a sudden found themselves rather maladapted to their surroundings. There are a lot of different evolutionary things, being big, being woolly, all those kinds of attributes work when it's cold, but In warmer climates, not so much. So that meant that once humans arrived, a lot of these megafauna were already in a bad way. And so the introduction of humans tipped them past the breaking point, and many of them went extinct. There are some outliers, like for example, there was a species of small island mammoth that existed until about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. And also, there are places where humans had not arrived by the time the Ice Age megafauna were already gone. One of the most famous examples would be the infamous terror bird of South America, that despite the fact that it would have made a really cool movie, humans never actually came in contact with giant evil birds. So all in all, like any historian or archaeologist in this case would say, shit's complicated. All right, now back to Anarchist Wishbone.
Thank you for that step back into history, Tristan, of Step Back History. Anyways, basically, advances in hunting led to the end of hunting as a way of life. But rather than go extinct themselves, humans progressed even further, switching to a Stardew Valley type existence. Bro, they literally made a live-action role-playing game based on Stardew Valley. Sick! As Wright puts it, unlike mobile foragers, sedentary people had little reason to limit their number of children, who were useful for field and household tasks. Farmers soon outnumbered hunter-gatherers, absorbing, killing, or driving them into the surrounding wilderness. Like the Neanderthal and the big game before them, hunter-gatherers were now going extinct under the grinding wheel of progress. Don't ask me why these ships of progress that are civilizations also have wheels on them. It's complicated. Anyways, later on in the book, Wright will discuss the role hierarchies play in progress traps and the collapsing of civilizations, but to just tease that idea for now, Wright concludes the chapter stating, in hunter-gatherer societies, bearing a few special cases, the social structure was more or less egalitarian, with only slight differences in wealth and power between greatest and least. Freedom and social opportunity declined as populations rose and boundaries hardened between groups. Chapter 3, Fool's Paradise. Moving along through the history of progress, this chapter looks at some of the first failed societies, starting with Easter Island. Wright explains that Easter Island was a small island rich with fish, seals, seabirds, and such, and was settled around 500 AD, and in 5 or 6 centuries, the population had grew to about 10,000 people. If you know anything about Easter Island, it's the giant stone heads, loosely based on how humongous my cranium would be if my intelligence was contained within a human skull. Or no, wait, they were actually created by clans honoring their ancestors, with each generation creating larger and larger monuments, demanding more wood and rope in their creation, deforesting their small island in the process. They used all their wood to build monuments, and the rats which traveled to the island by boat with them ate up all the seeds and saplings, ensuring that there were no new trees, and so their society collapsed. Another failed society is the Empire of Ur in the Fertile Crescent around modern-day Iraq. This society was built around an irrigation system that ended up being the progress trap that was their undoing. As Wright explains it, rivers rinse salt from rocks and earth and carry it to the sea. But when people divert water onto arid land, much of it evaporates and the salt stays behind. Bro, you're supposed to salt your food after you harvest it? Duh. Anyways, Wright adds, as time went by, the Sumerians had to replace wheat with barley, which has a higher tolerance for salt. And Wright concludes, the short-lived empire of Ur exhibits the same behavior as we saw on Easter Island, sticking to entrenched beliefs and practices, robbing the future to pay the present, spending the last reserves of natural capital on a reckless binge of excessive wealth and glory. God, I'm sure glad we've progressed beyond that foolish behavior, am I right? Pff, sticking to entrenched practices, depleting natural resources, robbing the future to gain tremendous wealth in the present, causing your society to collapse? How embarrassing. Chapter 4, Pyramid Schemes. Moving right along with this history of progress, Wright looks at some of the subsequent societies after Easter Island and Sumer, which also collapsed. Looking at 2 different types of collapses which affected 4 different civilizations. The fall of the Roman and Mayan empires, and the sort of seasonal falls and rises which took place in Egypt and China. It's time to talk about the roles that hierarchy plays in the fall of civilizations. To start, Wright states, a pyramid of stone or brick, which may also take the shape of a colossal statue, tombs, or office towers, is the outward and visible sign of a human social pyramid. And the human pyramid is in turn carried by a less visible natural pyramid, the food chain and other resources and the surrounding ecology, often termed natural capital. Civilizations often behave like pyramid sales schemes, thriving only while they grow. Speaking of thriving only when you grow, enter the Roman Empire. Wright explains that although Italy faced a lot of deforestation as Rome grew, it did not cause Rome's collapse, as what happened on Easter Island. It only led to a shrinking agricultural output, causing more reliance on imported grain from surrounding colonies. Wright states, as the empire impoverished the soils of southern Europe, Rome exported its environmental load to colonies, becoming dependent on grain from North Africa and the Middle East. The empire fell hardest at its core, the Mediterranean basin, where the brunt of the environmental cost was borne. And the rest, as they say, is history. The empire had expanded to feed the center, eventually spreading itself too thin, facing invading outsiders, internal turmoil and such, and falling apart. Next, Wright looks at the Mayan Empire, which faced a very similar fate. As Wright puts it, the city began as a small village on good bottom land beside a river, a rational and harmless settlement plan at first. But as it grew, it paved over more and more of its best land. Farmers were driven up onto fragile hillside soil whose anchoring timber had been cleared. As the city died, so much silt washed down that whole houses and streets were buried. And also like Rome, the Maya elite became extremists or ultra-conservatives, squeezing the last drops of profit from nature and humanity. So, the Roman and Mayan empires collapsed because the pyramid that was their social hierarchy was supported by the overexploitation of the natural capital, which supported their societies, and so these societies collapsed. Let's look at a different style of collapse, what Wright calls perennial empires, that of Egypt and China. These societies didn't collapse completely as Rome and Maya did because their geography imposed limits on their growth. For example, when the water of the Nile River ran low, crops staggered and waterborne illnesses spread and populations died out. Exploitation of the natural capital slowed and was able to repair itself, and the cycle would commence again. China had been blessed with a layer of good soil hundreds of feet thick, so when that soil eroded, it only exposed more healthy soil underneath. On top of this, political turmoil caused a cycle between high levels of civilization and exploitation of natural resources and, well, the lack of that. To all of this, Wright concludes, the health of land and water, and the woods, which are the keepers of water, can be the only lasting basis for any civilization's survival and success. And finally, Chapter 5, The Rebellion of the Tools. Wright looks at historian and anthropologist Joseph Tainer's three aspects of collapse: the runaway train, the dinosaur, and the house of cards. I'm sure you can gather from the names how these work, but basically, the runaway train would be something like the fall of Rome. Runaway expansion required to maintain an empire, but also spreading it too thin and tearing it apart. The dinosaur would be like the collapse of Easter Island, where those who were calling the shots in society refused to change their ways, sticking their long necks in the sand despite signs of trouble ahead, leading to catastrophic results. And finally, the House of Cards, being something like the fall of Ur, where they'd built their society based on an unstable, complex irrigation system, which allowed their civilization to grow, but was ultimately its undoing. And of course, thinking about the exponential growth and scale of progress, these collapses were more and more disastrous over time. The fall of Ur only affected like 500,000 people, whereas the fall of Rome affected tens of millions. And if our current society were to fall, it would affect everyone on the planet. Thinking about the dinosaur method of collapse and the role social pyramids play in collapsing societies, Wright states, the concentration of power at the top of large-scale societies gives the elite a vested interest in the status quo. They continue to prosper in the darkening times long after the environment and general populace begin to suffer. Anyways, here's some articles about how the richest people in our current society are the biggest contributors to climate change and are at the same time going to be most protected from its consequences, something folks are calling climate apartheid. Yay! But progress doesn't always mean destroying the ecology of your society. Wright clarifies that progress can have a positive impact on the ecology as well. For example, Islamic farmers in Spain using advanced irrigation schemes to repair the soil which was destroyed under the Roman Empire. Okay, so civilizations have an ecological cost. What was the ecological cost of building our current society? Wright explains that the Industrial Revolution was funded by colonization, particularly the discovery and theft of the Americas, and that since the Industrial Revolution, our current society has been sustained through the development of combustion engines, synthetic fertilizers, all that good stuff. As Wright puts it, our age was bankrolled by the seizing of half a planet, extended by taking over most of the remaining half, and has been sustained by spending down new forms of natural capital, especially fossil fuels. So that's how we funded the current civilization. How do we keep it from depleting the natural capital sustaining it? How do we keep the hierarchical structures from destroying it? How do we avoid befalling the same fate as civilizations of the past? Well, we need to be mindful of potential progress traps, such as our dependence on plastics or oil or neocolonialism or something like that. Perhaps it's not properly preparing for the unforeseen consequences in advances in automation or bioengineering. I could think of a million ways our civilization's various advancements might screw us over in the end. We've got potential runaway trains, dinosaurs, and House of Cards all over the place. Wright argues that if civilization is to survive, it must live on the interest, not the capital of nature. Our present behavior is typical of failed societies at the zenith of their greed and arrogance. This is the dinosaur factor, hostility to change from vested interests, and inertia at all social levels. Wright's solution is the following. The most compelling reason to reform our system is that the system is in no one's interest. It is a suicide machine. Okay, true, so far so good. The reform that is needed is not anti-capitalist, anti-American, or even deeply environmentalist. It is simply the transition from short-term to long-term thinking, from recklessness and excess to moderation and the precautionary principle. Boo! Bad! Dumb! No! How the heck does Wright think we're going to protect the ecology without being anti-capitalist? How the heck are we supposed to address the hierarchies of our social pyramids without being anti-capitalist? Come on, dude, let's be real here. That said, I do agree with Wright's final proposition. He states, we have the tools and the means to share resources, clean up pollution, dispense basic healthcare and birth control, set economic limits in line with natural ones. If we don't do these things now while we prosper, we will never be able to do them when times get hard. Conclusion. Well, so we're all doomed. Maybe. I don't know. Overall, humanity survived the extinction of big game and the fall of Sumer and Mayan and Roman empires, so many extinctions and fallen empires and diseases and plagues and pandemics and global wars, and we just keep trucking along. But at the same time, folks probably thought that Rome was going to last forever until it didn't. You know, like, what's that Ursula K. Le Guin quote about something divine king, something or other? Like, we live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable, so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Something like that. At the same time, unfortunately, the cautious long-term thinking that Wright calls for in this text is not our strong suit. I try to keep up on exercising and doing stretches and things like that, but that doesn't stop me from procrastinating on all that and then twisting my ankle in a mosh pit. Then, once the bad thing has happened, I do exercise and stretch and stuff like that until my injury heals, meaning to keep up with that exercising and stretching to avoid future injuries now that I've learned my lesson. But then apathy and procrastination eventually set in and the cycle starts all over again. Things can be like this on a society level as well. We don't do the needed maintenance on the levees so that we're ready when the flood happens. Instead, we just go all shocked Pikachu face when the levees fail and we have to rebuild once the floodwaters subside. Also, wait a minute, I just looked this up. Apparently the meme is called the surprised Pikachu. The fact that Pikachu is an electric Pokemon and they didn't call the meme shocked Pikachu, come on, it's right in front of you. Disappointing. Has this ever happened to you? You live around all this big game you'd like to eat, but it's very risky to kill just one of them. Introducing advances in hunting. Now you can kill whole herds of big game in style. Has this ever happened to you? You used to live around all this big game and now it's gone for some reason and you're getting pretty hungry. Introducing agriculture. You don't have to run around all over the place chasing game. Just stay in one spot and grow your food there. Has this ever happened to you? Your agricultural and irrigation systems destroyed the ecology. Now you don't have nearly the food output you used to. Introducing imperialism. Okay, so now you have to run around again, but this time you're taking over surrounding areas and stealing all of their goods and turning their populations into slaves and making their lands your breadbasket. Has this ever happened to you? Your city-state empire is spread too thin, chasing after needed imperialist acquisitions, and your society is being torn apart. Introducing the Industrial Revolution. Maintain colonialism and neocolonialism with ease. Increase your agricultural output. destroy distances in time and space with steam power and gas power and digital power and, perhaps most important of all, firepower. Let's go! Has this ever happened to you? Your industrial society has had ecological consequences you didn't properly plan for. Now you're about to end the world. Introducing... Introducing... Nothing? We don't have anything? What am I supposed to tell them? What am I supposed... Oh, okay. Oh, this? Okay. If you'd like to learn about how the societies of the past collapsed, if you'd like to learn about the history of progress and the various progress traps which that progress brought about, then I recommend A Short History of Progress by Ronald Wright. And as always, I'd like to thank my wonderful patrons. Your tremendous support has allowed me to get dog insurance, which is wonderful. You've allowed me to support other creators I couldn't otherwise support. Gotta love that. You provided me with a little extra funds for books and dog toys and things like that, which is really awesome. I appreciate you folks a lot. And if you like what I do here and you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/radicalreviewer. And if you're interested in radical theory, looking for a book recommendation, or whatever, you can get your radical reviews here with the Radical Reviewer. Thanks for watching.
Bleach out the oceans, castrate the wind, sterilize the blood so we die while we live. What we fear is what we pave. So bury the planet in a concrete grave. Say your prayer, cast your vote, place the predator's hands right around his throat.
We can burn fossil fuels like there's no tomorrow. And at this rate, there won't be a tomorrow.